Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Ben House. So if you haven't heard of Ben, Ben has a PhD, of course, seeing as he is a doctor, and has worked as a strength and conditioning coach and nutritionist since 2006. He is currently lifting, teaching, and researching, and that's why I really wanted to get him on the show, because he has been looking into many of the things that we're very interested about on this podcast in terms of getting jacked, and that is actually a big kind of topic that we're going to be discussing today. First of all, Ben, I've done a real big disservice. I feel I haven't gone into kind of who you are as a person or very much, so I don't know if there's anything you want to get, let the listeners know kind of what got you into all of this and where you've come from.
Yes. So I fell in love with the barbell when I was 13. So that's generally, don't put that in your CV. But I'm a failed athlete, and I've put all of that ego, all that failed athleteness into lifting and training and also academics. And so got into med school without an undergraduate degree. My godfather's a dentist, and he's like, "Hey man, I don't know if you really want to be a doctor. I don't know if you want to I don't know if you want to be a real doctor. I think you want to be a fake doctor." So I elected not to go to med school, and then got a PhD in nutritional sciences instead from UT Austin. And then at UT Austin, kind of really pertinent to what we're going to be talking about today, had the ability to run MRIs, had the ability to run BODPAs, DEXAs, skin calipers. So any kind of body composition data analysis, I've had it done on me, and I've done it. Since the age of 23, I've been carrying around an ultrasound with me. And so there's not many people that have been doing that. No. And I know the positives of those and also the detriments of those, maybe not to the extent that maybe someone like Abby Smith-Ryan or Eric Drexler does, who kind of run those, looked at the statistical analysis of those 4-compartment body compositions data. But I think a lot, it's easy to sell people on the internet on this stuff with the positives, but we don't necessarily take into account the negatives and how hard. I think Han et al. Did a really good job of talking about how hard it is to actually measure hypertrophy.
Yeah. And
so we're flying kind of blind once it comes to the levels of muscle mass that you've attained, that maybe some people would say that I've attained. You're leaner than me, and we're about the same weight. So I'll give you the nod.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I first got into all of this, like those seem like really sexy tools to like go onto, and like in your local pharmacy, there would be like, you could stand on this scale and it'll tell you your body fat. And the thing is, people do them, and I did them, and you don't really know what you're doing it for. You're just kind of like stepping on it, and you hope it's saying something better than last time. You don't really understand kind of how difficult it really is to measure some of these things, and people have their scales at home and they measure them. But like you've said, and I know like the big articles I saw on it was by James Krieger, where he went over all of the different various kind of methods that you can use, and how kind of big error rates there are even in things like a DEXA scan, which is seen as kind of more so the holy grail. And then it's a case of, whoa, so we don't even have great ways of measuring this yet. We have I'm a coach, and I'm coaching people to try and grow this stuff, and like measuring it is so difficult. So how can we even know what we've done is doing what we need to do? And I guess we're probably jumping ahead of kind of where we wanted to go with the podcast. So we're definitely touch on measurement down the line, and it impacts everything that we're going to be talking about already. But something that the kind of main topic of the podcast is going to be nutrition for muscle growth, essentially. And a big part of that in terms of kind of the surplus. I guess we could start off, and I wanted to start off with, and kind of to reiterate to the listeners how little research we really have on it, and you have done a great job of reviewing both of these over on your podcast and on your channel over on YouTube. So I'll definitely make sure to link that so people can get an in-depth view of it. But there was the Ribeiro kind of 2019. I know you kind of referred to it as like the dirty bulk, which I've certainly done.
We have to talk about that study. That study's absolutely amazing.
Go for that one.
not for the metrics. Well, so if you read kind of the gray literature on mass gaining, you'll see a couple citations that pop up that when people say that you need an excess of calories, or they're maybe against an excess of calories for gaining fat-free mass. And they'll generally pull up the Garth paper, which is out of Norway, and it's in elite athletes. But you got to remember, like when they say elite athletes, they're talking about like kayakers, taekwondo, karate, they're elite at their sport, but in terms of body composition, they're not elite at all. Their FMIs are their fat free mass index is about 19. So these guys are novices at best. And so that Garth paper, they did nutritional counseling versus ad libitum eat. So it was one group was told to eat more. It was just eat more food. That's the extent to their nutritional counseling. And then the other group was actually held adherent to kind of trying to gain. And so they ate about 500 calories more than the ad libitum group. So the biggest takeaway from that Garth study was, like, if you have elite athletes and they're training 18 hours a week, you can't just tell them to eat more. It doesn't work. You got to have more of a cognitive oversight, or you got to have a bigger tool if you want to actually have them gain some weight, if that is your arm. But these guys didn't need to be bulking. The main story from that is, like, they didn't need to be in an excess of calories. They gained, if we look at the research of how much muscle you can potentially gain in like an 8 to 12 week period in novices, it's probably about 1.5-ish kilos, depending on the study. And that's right where they were. The group that actually ate at an excess of calories, they gained 1.7 kilos. And then the group that ate they still gained muscle because they're training, because they're novices, they gained about 1.2 kilograms of muscle mass. So my theory here, in terms of that Garth paper, is that they're so new, they've kind of maxed out the amount of muscle that they can put on the frame anyways. And then you don't necessarily need to have an excess of calories to do that. And then the Ribeiro study was like, that was the Jedi study. That was like you see this thing and you're like, dude, this is the last hope. Yeah. This is it, man. You're like, this is a study. And then you get into it. It's like 11 subjects. Calipers gets real terrible real fast. And then they used an equation that was body weight, age, race, and sex. So it didn't even, if you gained weight with the equation, you gained muscle. But they had a high amount of calories versus a moderate amount of calories excess. And these guys were big. These guys were on caliper, like, they're bigger than you and I. We're talking 90 kilos, 13 to 16% body fat. So maybe a little bit chubby. Probably more than a little bit chubby, because 13 to 16% on calipers is really probably 18. So those FMIs might have even been inflated a little bit more than we think. But nonetheless, these dudes did eat almost 1,200 grams of carbohydrates per day. Have you ever eaten that many carbohydrates?
No. The closest I've got is in a peak week, and I got close to 1,000, but I've not had over 1,000. That's nuts.
Well, I want to, like, I've had a couple of people who've hit that, like, for a week, but I can't imagine hitting that number for four straight weeks. Just like the amount of garbage that you would have to eat to get that done. And then you're like, okay, wow, that's heroic. So almost like 1170 grams of, but they had to be eating some trash too, because it was 1170 grams of protein, and then grams of carbs, and then their protein was only at 165, and their fat was only at 80. So these guys had to be eating like Rice Krispie treats and like things like that are just pure carbohydrates. Because in my head, logistically, that's the only way they could have got it done. And then just as heroic is the moderate energy group, which is eating 4,500 calories and 720 grams of carbohydrates. And so you have all right, this is the study we've been dreaming about. We have the excess of calories all in whatever they were eating, all in carbohydrates. Fat's pretty much the same at about 80 grams. And then protein for all our purposes here is over 1.8 grams per kilo. So if they had a DEXA, if they had a better method of measuring body composition, and the study wasn't 4 weeks, I would have been so hyped up about it. But it was 4 weeks long. And these dudes, Greg Knuckles back calculated it, because you couldn't really take you couldn't really use their numbers because of their skeletal muscle mass. You had to use it. He back calculated off the caliper data. And that's where I got really, really squeamish really, really fast, is because he found that high group gained 2.4 kilos or over 5 pounds of muscle in 4 weeks. And I've known, like, my best friend is a professional bodybuilder, and he got on the stage at 19, won his pro card, and he's 28 now. He's my height, 230 pounds, and he's got an FMI of 27, lifetime drug free. And that dude he was strong as shit then, and he's strong as shit. He's like, he can deadlift 700 pounds, and he's put on 6 to 8, maybe 6 to 10 pounds of muscle, depending on how you would measure it, in 8 years. And that's where I'm like, all right, I'm willing to throw this study out. And that might not, like, I know we don't want to throw literature out, but at this point, like, it doesn't make any sense. If we had better metrics, I love the methodology. I love it. I wish it was longer, and I wish we had a better body comp data. But we also have, one of the big things is, if you look at the standard error measurement on even a DEXA, it's 0.86. If you look at that Abby Smith-Ryan paper on a floor compartment, that's with DEXA and BIA. That means that for you to be confident in an individual metric being changed, you probably have to gain 1.5 kilos or 2 kilos. So you're talking 4 pounds of muscle for you to even have confidence in that change in a DEXA. So you live this life more so than me. I just scrolled through your pictures, like back in the day, no back, giant back. What kind of weight changes have you seen?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because when I've gone through this and seen kind of, after this many years, you're kind of advanced, and therefore you can only look to gain like a pound a year if you're doing well, like your kind of pro friend has done. It hasn't quite followed that line for me. I've kind of had spurts of periods of time where it's kind of, I've grown quite well, like as a novice, and then it's kind of slowed up, and then it's spurted again. And I think it's related to the fact of just being more specific and doing things better, like having a surplus versus having like a moderate kind of maintenance level of calories. So yeah, I started at maybe around 140 pounds. I've always been slim, and now I'm like 186 pounds. So gained just over 40 pounds maybe of muscle, somewhere around that, which I think is pretty decent according to some of the things that are out there. But yeah, it's definitely not been a case of it just has been very like the trend of, it all came on suddenly and then just trickled off. It's kind of been like, it spurted on, kind of not much happened, then some more came on as I kind of got a bit smarter and did things a little bit better. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, kind of as the adaptive resistance builds up, you're just going to slow down your muscle gains. But I think in practice for a lot of people, it doesn't seem to quite go that way.
I think Ryan would, having talked with him about his results, he would agree with you. Is it definitely like it ebbs and flows, and he got to that point pretty early. I would say, like,
at 19.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, like he started dieting when he was 11, and which is crazy. Like, don't do that. You would tell him, don't do that. And so like he's been able to, and I think honestly, like if we're getting into the theory of that, I think probably accruing a bunch of muscle in those adolescent years is going to be beneficial. Like when and this is complete conjecture, but I mean, you think about just having a lot of testosterone around, and then potentially building up that myonuclei during that period of time. It's something that I've thought about. I don't necessarily have a way to test it, but it makes mechanistically, it kind of makes sense. Is if you burn down this 14 to 19, you might have increased your ability to your myogenic potential by increasing your number of myonuclei, so that the myonuclear domain, big words, blah blah blah. And so that's conjecture on my part, but it makes a lot of sense in that I see some people that have, and this isn't everyone, but I do see some people that have come to the game later, and they and again, we're in the land of placebo, or we're in the land of anecdote, but it does seem like they have a different ceiling. I don't know. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess whenever I think about who are the best bodybuilders, the phrase that comes to mind is like the ones who have been doing it the longest, which necessitates probably starting young, because once you get to a certain age, no matter if like you haven't been lifting or you have, you're just not able to recover the same, and kind of the hormone profile is not as good, especially when you get like into, I think it's like after 40 years old and things. So that definitely aligns with those thoughts. So I think that makes it could, I mean, again, anecdote, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I struggle with that too, because we have a couple of papers that show like the recovery times aren't different between 20 and 50-year-olds. And I'm not saying that to be a dick. I'm saying that because that doesn't, I think if that might be the case if you take novices, right? But it might not be the case if you take people who are advanced. Like, if you talk to enough people who've been doing, and it could just be joint stress, it could be, wear and tear from the iron game for 40 years.
Yeah.
And you do see that too. Is if you ask someone who's like gotten strong at the age of 60 and they love strength training. You're like, how long have you been strength training? They're like, oh, I started 2 years ago, and they're 60 years old. You're like, oh, that makes sense, because you don't find like people like us at the age of 60 who are like complaining about stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But so the ultimate question is that I think in practice, because we have all this research, and research is supposed to help us make decisions, and in this case, we have zero studies with external validity in these, if you are pushing kind of your genetic potential. And so from a practical side, it's really asking the question, do I want to try to recomp, maintain, or am I going to bulk? And that's where I'm looking at this as more nuanced than anything else, and more individual. So if I get someone like, because I've seen some crazy stuff in that, like, you get football players who've never done any bodybuilding training, and so they already have an FMI that's really high, like 25, and you're like, dude, there's no way this dude is a newbie as far as physique sports, and you put them on body, and they're a newbie. You get so mad, you're like, what the hell? And it's because they got into American football because they were such a, it's the biggest funnel we have.
Yeah.
And they get, so I wouldn't automatically I wouldn't pigeonhole people just because of their FFMI. If you haven't ever done like a hamstring curl or a leg extension or any of these more bodybuilding single joint exercises, and maybe you were a CrossFit athlete, I think you could be more of a novice or more of an intermediate when you transition to a physique sport. But on the flip side, if you've been bodybuilding for, legit bodybuilding for 10 years, then maintaining and bulking are probably more going to behoove you to spend your time there.
Do you think for the novice, I guess the Garth study kind of confirmed this in a way, a novice, they don't need to be in a surplus? Like, do you think the surplus could give them, like, if they were like, I just want to gain all the muscle and I don't care about the fat gain, do you think that could give them an edge, or do you think it's just unnecessary and it's just they're grow at their rate limiting kind of muscle gains anyway?
So we have a couple papers on that. We have the new Benito. It came out in February. I just found it. This meta-analysis. It's kind of in an obscure journal. It's a meta-analysis of fat-free muscle mass, and they do it. They kind of they have quintiles, and not even quintiles. They have 5 categories. Then they break them down by the amount of training years, which I hate, because just because you say you've been training 5 years does not mean you're advanced. You could be bench pressing the same amount that you did at Planet Fitness yesterday, and that you did 5 years ago. So that's a big red flag, but it's probably the criteria that they had to use because of those other studies. And so what they've found is it looks to be about like 1.6, like we talked about, 1.6 kilos over what maybe let's say 8 to 16 weeks of a good resistance training protocol. But we do have this crazy study out of UC California, Long Beach, which is that Rosniak. Have you seen that Rosniak study? I don't know how to say his name. I
don't recognize the name. It might ring a bell when you go through it.
It's from 2002. So they had a control group, and then this is obviously like when mass gainers were a big thing, because this is a mass gainer study. And so they had the group that was just not getting a mass gainer, and then they had a group that was getting both of these 2,000 calorie, 2010 and 2020 calorie mass gainer shakes. So just like create 3 cups of milk, 3 cups of skim milk, and a lot of scoops of mass gainer. I know I did that, so I got a little nostalgic reading this paper. And so they had not that huge. I can pull it up. Not that big of a difference between the two shakes. Like one shake was 100 grams of protein and 350 grams of carbs, and then the other one was 450 grams of carbohydrates and then only 24 grams of protein. And so they didn't find any significant differences between those two groups in terms of muscle mass gain. But in 8 weeks, those guys gained 3 kilos, and they didn't put on any fat.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. And so, that's pretty cool. So maybe you could argue, you can kind of make the argument, and this would be, for me, this would be on an individual basis. Are you getting fluffy or not? And if you're not getting fluffy, like, so say I would use this if someone's like starting in the 10 to 15% range, they're kind of like yourself. They're 150 pounds and they're already pretty lean. Then I'm going to be a lot more apt to use an excess of calories. Whereas if you are in the obese or overweight category and you're, say you're a guy and you're over that maffetone, which is about 18% body fat, then I'm going to be like, all right, we probably don't need, just because of inflammatory mechanisms and nutrient partitioning and just insulin resistance, because you have too much, you've been eating too much for too long. Then I'm going to be more apt to not use that type of approach. But I think that it could potentially have merit. And then you get into the argument of hard gaining, which is, I think there's some really cool practical things that researchers may not be able to think about because they don't work with people. Mm-hmm. And so from a practical standpoint, the thing, getting back to the avatar that we started with, this advanced person.
Yeah.
The thing that I find really tough is actually being in an excess of calories. And so the actually getting there seems to be the hard part. And then once you get there, you probably got to do it on repeat. And so it just becomes a logistical issue if you're got to eat 500 grams of carbohydrates and 150 grams of fat, and then 200 grams. You're not really worried about your protein at that point. You're just trying to eat enough calories. It really does become a logistical problem. And this is kind of where the argument lives in the evidence-based fitness community. And it's so minutiae. And so it's, should you gain 1 to 2 pounds in a month, or should you gain 3 to 4 pounds in a month? And that's where do you sit on the argument?
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up. See you there.
So it's really interesting you talked about kind of getting people into a surplus, because it's something I think when I mentioned I struggled to gain, I gained more muscle years after a period of time where you'd expect it to slow down. It was basically, I shifted my mindset from trying to stay in a certain percentage above stage weight and a certain kind of surplus, and gaining very slowly, where I could gain 1 month, lose 1 month, and just trying to manage it on a too much of a micro scale. I just kind of was like, I'm going to go into a more assertive surplus, make sure I'm gaining. So going more so towards that kind of 3 to 4%, like 2% of body weight per month. Mm-hmm. And that was where I think I made much better progress, because I just was like, I know I'm in a surplus. I can focus on my training. I don't have to kind of micromanage my nutrition as much. And I found the same with a lot of clients where they just become a little bit kind of fat phobic and a bit worried about gaining all this kind of excess weight. And their mindset is, and a kind of phrase I often talk about is people are too concerned about gaining minimum kind of fat during their masses rather than gaining maximum muscle. I want to focus on the maximum muscle rather than the minimum fat, because fat is generally easier to get rid of for a lot of people. So that's where I tend to sit at the moment, at least.
I'm in the same boat, because I think once you're talking about, you get a 185 to 220 pound individual, what's 1 to 2 pounds on the scale? Really, you think the fine scale variability of that shitty scale you have in your bathroom is going to be able to pick that up? And I don't think the sensitivity is good enough to do that. That's where I just worry about people wasting time. Yeah. And I see people a lot wasting time on all right, I got to put all my excess of calories on my workout days, because otherwise it's going to turn to fat. And I'm like, dude, just eat, man. And so I kind of got down. I probably got, I don't know, had abs. You can see quads, definitely not glute striations. Eric wanted to see my glutes. I told him no. I said, back off. It's the first time I know you. And so I think I got to low 170s, 175-ish. I got under 175 for the first time in a long time. And that was about 6 months ago. And I just started eating to fullness. And for me, if I ate to fullness, it seemed to be like on a super individual basis. If I ate to fullness on 3 meals, I get really fat really fast. But if I ate to fullness on 2 meals, so if I just woke up, had a snack, I kind of figured this out by just trial and error, because that's when I'm most productive anyways, just have a protein shake, get a snack before I train, and then eat those bigger meals after I train to fullness. Like I'm not eating clean. Then I've been able to slowly gain weight. So I've crept from like 175 in 6 months. Now I'm in the low 180s. And so on paper, that's pretty solid. But now can I be absolutely sure that I put on muscle mass? I don't know. And that's where we get into the measuring of this thing is really hard. Like people will say 10 rep max on a bench press, but I'm like, dude, my 10 rep max on a bench press hasn't moved for the last, it's good. Like my 10 rep max is 250 pounds. Like you think that's going to go up a lot anymore? Like, I don't think that's going to go up. And it's a multi-joint exercise. So one of my buddies is like, maybe we should just use like a bicep curl. Maybe like reps across a bicep curl, like a preacher curl. Maybe or a leg press or something super stupid. And I don't mean that like functional, but also less functional maybe. But that's kind of where, if we're gonna think about measuring this, how can you know? I don't think you can know, but you can be a little bit more sure, because I think you're really unsure if you go from 175 to 177 pounds in 2 months. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially kind of measuring it and performance being a marker, because I know for a time there was people were trying to use like even like 1 RMs, 3 RMs. It's kind of, well, they're so skill based. And then you're completely right with compound lifts, and they're still, even like I look back at my technique like even 2 years ago and I'm like, I've just changed that to be like superior for hypertrophy, at least I hope so. And it's different, so I can't really compare it. Whereas I think, like you mentioned, the isolation movements, there's only so much you can change technique on that to make it that way. So I think at the moment, if there is something to look at, that probably is the way to go. Like performance across sets for like 10 plus reps on an isolation movement potentially is kind of at the moment the most kind of scientific way we actually have to measure things. At least it's kind of practical for a lot of people as well.
It's what they care about. At least in my opinion, at least it's process oriented, where you can kind of get, like having an ultrasound, like my muscles, it's going to have variability for 72 hours after a workout. Like if I get, so it's just, when's the last time you took 72 hours off training? I can't remember. And so like you'd have to probably lock me out of gym, lock everything heavy away for me. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe I should look at that, but it hasn't been. It's my anchoring habit as an individual training. And so that's kind of where we get into the problems of measuring this stuff. And that's where, for me, measuring sub-Q fat on an adipose, like, and we can kind of talk about even the theory about this, because I respect where you're coming from as well. It's like, so in my head, this sounds like a good idea, right? So if I can check sub-Q ultrasound is really consistent. It does like pressure the probe that you can just stick it on there. It doesn't move a lot. You can get sub-Q measurements of fat. And so you could, if that sub-Q fat measurement isn't moving and you're gaining weight, in theory, you would be gaining muscle mass or gaining water, something else. You wouldn't be gaining subcutaneous adipose tissue in theory. But then in my head, I'm like, if I gain 2 pounds of fat across my entire body, am I going to be able to pick that up on a millimeter basis on my ab? And like, is it going to actually show up? And that's where I don't have an answer. It seems like it could theoretically work, but I may be worrying about minutia again. And maybe it's a stupid checkpoint. But for me, it seems like I have it. It's not hard. It's easy. It's cost effective. But do I think that everybody needs to be doing that? Probably not. Have you played with that Sculpt scanner? I haven't. No, I have seen it. Yeah. So that thing, it's seems to do all right if you look at the research comparing it to DEXA, but it's so variable. I did it for like 30 days straight, and it was pretty good on the ab measurement. But once I started throwing in like multiple measurements, it just had compounding error. So I can't really give people a way to measure, unfortunately. I think you could get, if you've gained maybe 5 to 6 pounds, maybe you could pick that up in a DEXA. Maybe. If you really wanted to measure it, if that's what your priority was. And then I think like if you gain weight and you were keeping maybe a caliper measurement the same and you were doing it yourself and you know it was pretty consistent, maybe you could make a case that and your more importantly, your reps across a preacher bicep curl or leg press or leg extension was going up, then I think you're probably gaining muscle.
Yeah, I think it's, like you said, it's so challenging, especially as someone advanced, because if you are gaining muscle, you're for sure gaining probably quite a bit more fat than muscle. So even like visuals are quite challenging in that sense. And then even like you said, once you get, well, I don't know, if you get slightly soft and maybe you allow the body fat to go up a little bit, you can't see what's necessarily going on. And so a lot of the, as a kind of from my perspective, at least for myself and a lot of my clients, I just end up using photos and kind of almost trusting the process in terms of we know we're hitting training kind of correctly, we're ticking the boxes, making sure weight's going up at an appropriate, not excessive pace, making sure we're getting our protein in and getting all the kind of details in as best as we can. And then it's through maybe a mini cut where you cut down and you kind of then reveal a little bit of what potentially you've been building. And maybe it's not until, and for me, it wasn't until kind of I had a 3-year off season, competed in 2017, got up through kind of successful bulks and then mini cuts, and I eventually hit 200 pounds just over, and then I cut down 20 pounds. I was like, wow, this is what I've built under here. If only, like, before that I kind of thought things were okay, but you can't necessarily be sure because you've accrued all that. Well, I accrued maybe like, I don't know, 30 pounds of fat to gain like 5+ pounds of muscle, which for me is definitely worth it. But that's a challenging thing to sell to someone, to go through being that high above, like that high percentage body fat and force feeding that much. Like it's not easy.
Whenever I talk to I have the opportunity to give talks to, my wife's a pretty well-known yoga teacher. And so she'll bring me in to talk about nutrition, primarily vegan crowd, has very little interest in what I like. And so I'll start by making fun of myself. I'll be like, hey, this year I'm going to easily eat 5,000, I eat 5 pounds of food a day on an easy day. So you're talking 1,500, 2,000 pounds of food in a year. It's truckloads of food. I'm going to lift 10 million pounds. And for all that effort in a year, maybe I would be ecstatic if I gained 0.5 pound of muscle. I'd be so stoked. And so that, like, right away they can see the opportunity cost of that is so high. It's so stupid. And so I'll just and so if you're there, number one, I appreciate you. If you're listening to this and you're going about this battle, I think it's a beautiful thing, but it is hard. It's a really, really hard sell. Number one, because even in our social media realm, like you look phenomenal right now. You and I both, we're going to look puffy at 200 pounds. And everybody's gonna be like, dude, I don't know if that guy's got a PhD in nutrition. I'm questioning. That guy looks pretty fluffy. And I've been 200 pounds on the scale. Granted, I had to hold some food, get on the scale, and then eat said food. But I got there, and that's where a part of me is. If you look, this is a really weird place for me to be. But now that I'm a father, and so if you look at the appetite literature, I'm like, where, and I've never thought about this before I became a dad. I'm like, where do I want to live? And it's never something I've thought about before this. I'm like, all right, say I just can't lift weights as much anymore. Luckily, I still can. But say there comes a day when I can only lift 2 or 3 times a week. Where do I want to stay? And I was like, well, I kind of want to be in the low 180s and 10-ish, still have abs. Like, it doesn't matter the percentage of abs, but at least have a 4-pack, not be squeamish about taking my shirt off. And I was like, all right, wow. So if I get up to 200 pounds, that's 10% weight loss. That means if I want to live at 180, I know I'm going to live at 180. And looking at the weight loss literature, my appetite's going to be up. And, I might even have a little bit of metabolic adaptation, God forbid. And so that's where I'm like, oh, wow. where do we want to set? How high do we want to go? That's where everybody has, this is where it really is a nuanced question that you have to ask yourself. I'm obviously reading a lot of like mother-daughter dyads. So like the coach individual dyad, everybody's just rolling their eyes right now. But I think that's where you kind of make that decision, is how high do you want to get? And then where do you want to live? And if your goal is to win the Olympia, like, you're probably going to have to get over 300 pounds and cut. But if your goal is to, to be even to be a good natural physique competitor, you're probably going to have to go. And it might be, you probably lost 30 to 40 pounds to get on stage, right? At least. Like, I can't imagine, like I've talked to people like yourself who've actually got on stage, and I have no desire to do that. But I've gotten to the point where I would have had to start dieting. Like, I'm waking up 3 times per night. I'm grumpy. And that's where they're like, yeah, you probably start your diet right here. I'm like, dude, no, wait, end my diet right here. And so I have a ton of respect for the amount of self-control that it takes to do that. But I also think that you guys have the best measurement of all, and that is your stage weight. And so, like, if you talk to physique competitors, it's like, hey, I weigh 6 pounds more this year, and it's been 4 years since I've competed, and I'm better conditioned. Therefore, something great happens. So let's go do it again. And that seems to be the theme that I see with the bodybuilders that I get to work with. Is like they're like, man, that sucked, but it was also awesome. And it's the only real metric I have to see if I'm progressing. So let's do it again.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's such a hard sell to people once you are gaining at such a slow pace. It's kind of like, but in that instance, I think it does at least mean, for me, I always frame it this way for like myself and for clients. Like, if you're going to be training 6 days a week and training really hard, do you want to kind of make sure that you're gaining everything you can out of that by being in, like, making sure you're in a surplus and maybe gaining a bit more fat than you should have, or like you could have gained a bit less? Or do you want to risk not getting everything out of all the hard work you're putting in? That's kind of the crux of it for me. And I was like, for most people, I think they can get the fat off reasonably well, so that it's not such a hard sell to them then.
Yeah, the risk of not making progress over is much higher to me than the potential for putting on 10 pounds of fat, which you can get off fairly easily. That's not that long of a cut in the grand scheme of a 3 or 4 year off season. Or then you get into in bodybuilding, you also get into people probably competing too often. Like, so they're never really accruing enough time to put on mass. And so that's where I'm really for, maybe you compete every 3 to 4 years, maybe even longer. Just because especially females, man, because that's going to take such a big toll on your body. Males, we seem to bounce back a little bit faster from getting lean. And unfortunately, I will say that we don't have, on those FMI values, we don't have as good of stopgaps on where you would be advanced and where you would not. Like, I think it's in the high teens, maybe the low 20s. If you look at that recent Trexler paper, like, they were finding female lifetime natural rugby players as big as us, which was like when you're 2 to 3 times outside the standard deviation, I was like, wow, I gotta get a little bigger. But no, that's cool to me. I don't. Yeah. I'm not a natty witch hunter at all. And I think that it's really, really cool if you funnel down an entire population. I think you are going to have these individuals who are just that big.
Yeah,
which is cool.
Yeah, I think it's like you said with the American football players. Like, they could be like the pro naturals if they wanted to be, but I mean, what do you get for being a pro natural? Not very much, apart from like some credibility on your end, but there's more money within American football.
I remember, like, it was, I worked in UT strength and conditioning. I was an intern. I'm not anything fancy. I was cleaning weights for the basketball team. And I remember, like, they had this running back who came in as a freshman, and he was like 5'10". So he was a little bit shorter. I'm going to say I'm 5'11", but I'm probably 5'10". And so hook 'em horns, they were like, he's undersized at 210. He's 210, shredded. He's 19 years old. They're like, he's a little bit undersized. Dude, you know how much that hurts right now? Like, I've been training. I'm 20 years old, but I've been training for 15 years. Training my ass off. A lot of it's stupid stuff, but still working hard. And this dude's undersized at 210 pounds. And so that was like just an eye opener for me. Is like, yeah, there are probably these individuals, and that's where you kind of just got to be thankful that these people exist. You can, in my opinion, you can either be angry and like then you can be telling everyone on the internet that they're on steroids, or you can give them the benefit of the doubt, and you can just be thankful that the human body can do that. And that's where I stay. And because I think you're going to have a much better life if you're not comparing yourself constantly to other individuals.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think at least there's something very rewarding about being the average, or that people like us who have to fight tooth and nail for every little thing, because then we appreciate it a lot more. Whereas I think when you're just, I don't know, I have a feeling when you're at that point, it's kind of like, you just don't understand everyone else. Like, why are you talking about all these details of training? You're like, just go and lift hard. It's like, oh yeah, you would say that. And then I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be one of them.
Yeah, that is a danger though. And I've seen it in the college. This is not, obviously there's exceptions to every rule. And I don't even think this is a rule, but I do think you get a lot of those dudes who get naturally strong, just like they look at weights and they get jacked. And then obviously they have to know. So I think this is happening less and less, but those guys used to be strength and conditioning coaches. And that it seems to be that now we're kind of pendulum shifting, and I might be completely off on this, but now maybe we seem to be getting a little bit too nerdy. And so I think that there's this happy medium of like, you got to work. You got to learn how to work. You got to really, if you want to be somewhat big, you got to learn how to eat shit. You got to learn how to like to eat shit. And then you got this other sector, which is why I worry about taking all these measurements, which is like the biohacker side, where it's like, hey, maybe it doesn't matter how much you pistol squat, like, because you can't pistol squat at all. So you're doing 20% of your pistol squat. So let's pick a different metric. And so they're just living in obscurity of thousands of numbers. And so that's why I think we want to have the effort, and then we want to really use research to think about what are the metrics that we're using. And in this case, unfortunately, there's not many metrics that we can be super confident in other than our effort and time. And so that's where I'm going to put my marbles.
Yeah. Fast, efficient fat loss. Does that sound like music to your ears? The mini cut movement might just be for you. Mini cuts are like robbing the fat bank. You want to get in and out with as much fat as possible. In a short period of time, you could easily look to lose 6 to 12 pounds of fat. The mini cut movement is excellent. There's group support for extra accountability and also expert help within the group. We have educational videos to keep you on track along the way, and you get all your nutrition and training customized and individualized for you. So if that sounds of interest, get involved with the mini cut movement. And you mentioned something in regards, and I thought it was actually really great in terms of kind of, at least for males, sticking maybe between that like 10 to 15%. Obviously, it's going to be individualized because for some people, like you said, they just can't live there without kind of feeling trash, and they're not going to be able to perform at their best. But a lot of guys will be able to probably land within that 10 to 15% body fat, where they're in a good position with their training, and also that ability to gain and kind of stay within there. You can kind of see a little bit more, at least, what's going on. So you might get some visuals that can help, even though it is slow. And you mentioned kind of getting above that. Potentially there's some downsides in terms of insulin sensitivity. And I don't know if like partitioning ratios comes into that. Is that something that you're on the side of staying like leaner is probably better? Like you might be sacrificing the speed, like your ratio of muscle to fat gain may worsen as you get like towards the higher end?
Yeah, I think once you get, and this is where we're kind of in the gray area again of like personal fat thresholds. If you look at insulin sensitivity, it is, and this is where we have to really question where this research is coming from, because this research is like these maltitone levels of body fat are coming from general public. So they're over fat, but then they don't have the levels of muscle mass that we have that is potentially really, really effective at guarding metabolic health. And so I think you might be able to go up to 18 to 20%. You could track, I get worried about, like, because health is such a nebulous term. And so if you're worried about metabolics, you could track, like, you could kind of give yourself like an in-home OGTT where you eat, because most people eat similar things, similar carbohydrate sources. So you could just measure your fat, like give yourself a finger stick poke every 30 minutes for 3 hours after your normal meal. And you probably don't want that to go over 140 or 160. Because once you get over 160, you're going to start spewing glucose out of your kidneys. And there's people that even want to keep that a little bit tighter. I'm not in that realm. I'm kind of in that anti-fragility carbohydrates. I'm not even against going over 160. It's not going to kill you. Like, the body's an amazing thing in that it can deal with large amounts of glucose. And so I was worried about this as, I think like 4 or 5 years ago. And I put continuous glucose monitors in a bunch of meat sticks. And what I found was like, oh, wow, I don't really need to worry about that. Because I gave them 500 grams of carbohydrates. So blood glucose of 85 milligrams per deciliter is about 4.5 grams in the blood.
Okay.
So for people thinking about this, that means that if I have an individual like James Serby of Rebel Performance, he's bigger than me. He's like mid 190s, probably 10 to 11% body fat, squats 405 for 5, like big dude. And I give him like 500 grams of carbohydrates. He doesn't move out of that 85 to 120 window. That means in the face of 500 grams of carbohydrates, he's in a 1 to 2 gram window inside his bloodstream. Like that's pretty amazing. And I think that's where we want to get to with all our individuals. And I don't necessarily know that goes away. And we don't have the research to say, because most of that research in inflammation and in nutrient partitioning is not in that individual. It's in individuals who are overfat without that level of muscle mass. So I think that you have more room to work with. But to me, it really comes down, what I've seen in coaching actual people is fluff. Like no one like once you get over 15% as a guy, you kind of start to get a little bit of a gut. And most of us have an aversion to that. So it's probably more psychological than anything else. I think physiologically we can make the argument against going over there from a metabolic health, from an inflammatory mechanism standpoint. But I think most people are just going to fight you because they're going to feel like they're getting too chubby and they're not going to like it.
Yeah.
But there might be some. We have the anecdotal stories. I know Nunez got up pretty high, like 250, and so I've
that's crazy.
Yeah, I've heard some, and I think like at a certain point, like for Ryan, who's my best friend, one of my best friends, and he's probably, that's where he's at. I think like he's gotten to that point where he is at a 27 to 28 FMI. Passing a lie detector, lifetime natty. I got all his blood work, so he's lifetime natty. And so he's probably got one thing left, and that's go higher. Like just take the gains way higher. And psychologically, I think he's ready for it. I don't think psychologically he would have done that when he was 19 years old.
Yeah.
And so that's his life. That's his passion. Now, do I want to do that? No. I don't want to force feed myself and be uncomfortable. And I've done that. And it's probably just, I think it's even tougher than dieting, being completely honest.
Yeah. On that point, when I pushed, the heaviest I'd ever pushed to before was 190 pounds. So pushing to 200 took everything. And I can legitimately say it's worse than the depths of contest prep. Because it was relentless, like having to force feed when you actually feel like you want to vomit. It was just horrendous. I don't know if maybe there was something off. I don't actually know. I went to my doctor a couple of times because I was literally concerned that I don't know if it was just leptin was that high that I literally couldn't force feed at one point. But it gets incredibly challenging. And I think that's a good point as well. It's like maybe like we do have to push like nutrition to that challenging point. You do have to push maybe up to higher body weights to get to those new levels. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that, which is fair enough, but it's not a case of using using it as a cop-out card. Like you said, your friend is willing to push there, and even if it's for a small gain, it's worth the cost to him. So that's really interesting. It's interesting to hear about the kind of potential kind of, I guess, anabolic resistance kind of theories of getting to higher body fats, and maybe it's not such a concern. I don't know if and this, I guess, is off the nutrition side, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of the training desensitization to like higher training volumes, if that's something that you've kind of thought much about in terms of periodizing those and to try and keep the kind of the gains going as such.
Yeah, man, we've argued. I think everybody who's gotten to this point is argued in that realm. Like, where do you want to be? Do you want to, like, is it the bean counter? Like, is it the double progression? Are you just chasing that last rep? Man, I don't know. And I wish I had an answer. I think that I'm kind of in the realm that you would spend most of your time in that mechanical tension model, and then give yourself, I think of it more like psychologically, I guess, than physiologically, because I just don't think we have the data to back up any of that. It's starting to look like we might have it, that there might be some type of sensitization to resistance training. You want to kind of back off and then go back on. But I think you naturally get to that point anyways. And it's kind of where like practice meets theory, and that if you run these double progressions first, but one thing I do see that really makes me mad is people changing exercises because they're addicted to like getting increases. And so I think like you want to spend most of your time in that mechanical tension model, and then jump out of it. Maybe you do some kind of metabolic stress block just to give you, because those are fun, man. Like that's like everything I did when I was 18, 19 years old, even 13 and 14, it was all like running 21s on curls. It was all metabolic. It was getting a pump. And so I think like we can lose that, and a lot that keeps training fresh. And so I would spend the majority of your time in that mechanical tension. I think that if I'm a gambler, so that's where I would put the majority of my money. But I think that if you want to really like not get burnt out on that, you probably want to do the things that you enjoy as well. And that's where you can put in some of those other tools, some of those metabolic stress blocks, and also give your joints a break. That's kind of the other thing is when you're running like a squat. Is it the best exercise for high end hypertrophy or hypertrophy? I don't know. At a certain point, I'm kind of like, man, do I even need a barbell squat? Does it? And if you would have told me that when I was 25, I would have slapped you. I'd be like, dude, no way, get out of here. You're gonna snatch, you're gonna bench press, and so now I've lightened up on a lot of those things that I used to take quite seriously. But we did an interesting study on this idea of changing exercises too fast. And what we found, which is really, really crazy to me, is we had guys train 4 days in a row, 4 sets to a 9-ish RPE on lat pull down, a bunch of cable work, and then hamstring curls, leg extensions. And these guys they were number one, they were doing these exercises previously, but all they did was go to new machines. The only thing that changed is because we brought them together, they were at a camp, and they just went to using new machines. Every day they went up. Every day they went up in reps. So I think like that's a way to trick yourself inside of this mechanical tension model, but really you're just getting better at the exercise. So this is part of like the opportunity cost. I think you got to stay in the same spot. I think you got to use the same machines, eat the same food. I think you got to be to really get gains. I think you got to be somewhat of a robot. And so granted, maybe you can do it while traveling. Maybe there's some type of, maybe you can work with that. You go to the same gym or whatever. There's ways around everything. But when I see people who are really successful, they're pretty robotic. They're using the same machines. They're not overhauling their training all the time. They're getting good at things, and then they're progressing them. And so that's where my head's at with the mechanical tension and resensitization models.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, it reminds me of just like massing momentum in a sense, where you are just in that kind of flow state where you're just ticking the boxes every day. You're just providing the body the signal of growth day in, day out for like extended periods of time. Well, it has to be long periods of time. And I would agree the people I've seen grow the most are the people who've just stuck to like being a robot executing the things they need to execute day in, day out for long periods of time. And it is, I don't say it that often, but it is said like bodybuilding is boring. Like there's not that much fancy stuff to it. Like you said, there can be the metabolic stress periods, there could be the mini cuts thrown in, and they can make things a little bit more exciting now and then. But the majority of the time is just lifting kind of the heavy weights, eating the food, and just doing that each day, so that the body is going to kind of eventually, hopefully, grow.
Yeah, what do you see from the general population? They're all looking for shortcuts. They're looking for the secret key that they can find on the internet that is going to get them 5 years of robot life. And guess what? Maybe you can find it in drugs, but what I worry about that is like, you think about connective tissue. Like, how long does it take connective tissue? Like, I've been back squatting since I was 13 years old. Like, I mean, I don't even know how much of that is muscle that I'm using to use that as muscle anymore. Like, because you got those connective tissues, they take 2 years. And so you want to pop a bicep tendon or do something crazy and pull a pec. You just start taking some drugs without building up that amount of bone and connective tissue to support that muscle architecture. And so that's where I'm like, even the shortcuts, you got to pay the man. You got to pay the toll. And that's work over time. And
I think in that sense, I hope it isn't a disheartening message to listeners, because I guess it kind of makes things seem a lot less sexy, and there is no kind of like hard and fast rules here. And I guess in a sense, a lot of the things we talked about and you mentioned are kind of, they're somewhat minutiae, and there's smaller details we don't know the answers to right now. And I guess the kind of, for me, the take home, if there was from our chat here, is like, just consistently do the basics, make sure that you're moving in the right direction over time, and don't change stuff too often. And then now and then, like after a long period of time, especially as you're advanced, you can strip back a layer and you kind of see what you've done in that hard work, and then maybe you can change something from there.
Yeah, if I had to sum it up for kind of the two avatars that we've talked about, like if your training age is not very high, you don't have to be worried about a lot of things. Effort is going to hold the most weight. So if you effort over time, you can even do stupid stuff. Like that's where as a coach, I'm not after perfection when someone is a newbie client. I just want them to keep showing up. I just want them, because even if I'm doing circuit training and like whatever, even if it's not optimum, if I can get them decent gains for longer periods of time, that's better than optimum for 6 weeks and then they're gone. So you have so many options with your general population clients. You got to make training fun. You got to communicate with them. You probably got to communicate with them in a way that's not like we're communicating right now. That you got to meet them where they're at, is with their vocabulary and with what their expectations of this gym experience. But on the flip side of that, once you get advanced, then you really have to bear down, and you have to look at this individually. Like what's the cost that you're willing to incur? Are you willing to put on fat? Are you willing to stuff yourself until you no longer feel like eating, and you feel like you're not alone, man? Like people going to the doctor when they're on gains phase. You know how many times I've heard that? Like, I feel terrible. I can't eat anymore. Like, what's wrong with me? Like, that's the cost of this. And then on the flip side of that, you have the beauty of what you just said. I went from 200 to 180, and I was like, dang, oh, that's what was underneath. Let's do this again. And so that's the two places. And I think as a coach, it's really fun because you can kind of guide, which one is which.
And I think to that point, as a coach, probably the thing I expect you may be the same, Ben, that normally I'm trying to save my client from themselves, where essentially they're getting a bit bored, and I'm trying to encourage them to just consist. And then maybe eventually they're getting so bored, adherence might break down, and then you have to you make a change and you can periodize. And I think that's where that beauty comes in.
Yeah, I think that's like mini cuts to me are just like appetite breaks. It's like I just remember like my jaw, like my masseter, like it wasn't like my quads were sore, or like I wasn't that sore anymore, and I was doing a ton of volume. It's like I couldn't eat. Like I was just so like I would have a meal, and then I knew I would have to eat another meal. and I was eating ton of cereal. Cereal, if like, it's kind of like this weird thing. If you're an advanced athlete, cereal is your friend. If you're the general population, cereal is not your friend. So maybe that's the transition. Once you get advanced enough, cereal can be your friend, but then you don't want it to be your friend.
Fantastic. Ben, thank you so much for this chat. It's been really fun. I think the listeners are going to have enjoyed it a lot, and hope they got a lot of takeaways. I want to make sure if people want to find out more about you, I know I already mentioned your YouTube channel, but I know you're over on Instagram, and where should people kind of try and find you?
Yeah, maybe my YouTube channel, there's some stuff on there, but definitely just uploading things there to use in other purposes. So, but if you want to go there, that's great. My Instagram is probably the place to go, at Dr. Van House. And then all of our stuff's at broresearch.com. So you can find what we're doing from the research side. And then we'll throw some articles up there every once in a while.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that's all linked below so people can go and head there. And yeah, thank you again. And thank the listeners for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.